Hi everybody, my name is Howard Snyder, and I built a city library. Not by myself, of course. There were a lot of people involved. Our developer partners, architects, lawyers, the bankers who financed the project, community protesters, the city, and kids who followed the lead of Gracelyn Wilson, our extraordinary youth worker. But I was the only one who was involved from day one until it seemed like forever. Not 1 year, not 2 years, not 3 years, not 4 years, not 5 years, not 6 years, not 7 years, 8 years. Yeah, 8 years. 8 years of anxiety, of occasional depression, suffering the ups and downs of any kind of a project like this. This time that just morphed into borderline obsession. This started in the summer of 2003. John Northwest, the then mayor of the city of Milwaukee, proposed to close a library, the Villard Library, our library. It was a decision that he would come to regret later on. It was a nasty little library, there was no doubt about that, but it was our nasty little library. We found out about the closing of the library with this form that was tacked on the inside wall of the old library as you walked in. We were disrespected. We were furious. This is not the way you found out something. It was worse the way we found out than the fact that the library was closing to begin with. They would never have dared to do this in another neighborhood, never. We believed that the decision was motivated by race. There was no doubt about it. But it was a no-brainer for the city. Either close a fire department engine company on the south side or a shabby little library on Milwaukee's African-American north side. People in the neighborhood went crazy. I was not unhappy. You see, I've always felt that part of my job was to try to bring power back to neighborhoods and back to neighborhood people. That was this moment. It was my moment, and I knew it. As the protests gained steam in the early fall, we had started a school and an after-school program in a building that we owned a little bit west of the library, just off of Villard Avenue. Villard, if you don't know, is the central business district for the old city of North Milwaukee. Gracelyn, get those kids the hell out of the building and take them down to the library and give them something useful to do. I've always been really big on useful, and she did. Why was the closing of the library so important? Well, we had lost a number of public buildings over the years. St. Michael Hospital closed. We lost 1,900 jobs. Post office left, school left, a bank left, several small businesses left. There were 2 high-profile murders in the neighborhood. Villard was on the verge of collapse. So the closing of the library was definitely the last straw. Kids used the library as a safe place to go after school. Senior citizens were able to walk to the building. Kids started congregating outside of the library, artistic kids, and they did what artistic kids do. They sung, they danced, they protested, they acted out a little bit. I told Gracelyn if they engaged in a little bit of civil disobedience, that was okay, so long as nobody got hurt. Horns started to honk when drivers went by the building and saw kids out on the lawn. We were starting to get some notice. There were 2 fairly large meetings, and they were well covered by the press. But a funny thing happened. It was 2003, not like today, when cutbacks and shortages are common. In that day, there wasn't any. So whenever there was a story in the newspaper about a cutback of this or a cutback of that, there was always an article in the newspaper that said, just like the Villard Library. We were in the library all the time, and it was completely accidental, had absolutely nothing to do with it. We kept the pressure up into the fall. We wore red shirts. We went to community meetings. We went to city budget meetings. We hectored everybody that we could possibly hector. And then Mayor Northwest said publicly, The Villard Library will remain open. The people have spoken. We had won. So why was I so unhappy? Every community organizer worth his or her salt gets up in the morning wanting to change the world, and I was no different. I had helped to lead a community protest that didn't change the world. In fact, the world was exactly the same. I remember my father once said to me when I was a kid that when he came back from World War II, a decorated veteran of combat in Europe, that he had done the most important thing that he would ever do by the time he was 23 years old. Truth be told, other than having a family, he was probably right. An entire generation of the unfamous greatest generation had done the most important thing that they would ever do. Their greatest moments had happened before the age of 25. In a very odd way, I felt the same way as them. My greatest moment had passed without any kind of recognition or any kind of accomplishment. Oh well, the pity party was over. The building had deferred maintenance, and the asbestos in the roof leaked whenever it rained. I got people together and said, why don't we just build a brand new library? It was ridiculous. I had absolutely no idea what I was talking about. People bought it anyway. We brought all the people into the library building, and we proposed building a brand new building. I took the idea to a developer friend of mine who said he thought it was a pretty good idea, but he did one up on me. He said, let's build a brand new library with affordable housing upstairs. We would use tax credits that you get from the state called low-income housing tax credits. We would build the upstairs, and the downstairs library would be funded through city funds. No one had ever proposed anything like that before. It was very unique. And he and his architects went to work putting architectural renderings together that we then submitted to the state of Wisconsin in the February of 2004. We waited until April, and word came back we had not gotten tax credits. I begged him to start all over again and said, look, we can submit this proposal in 2005. We're going to win this time. So he agreed. In 2005, we submitted the application, and in April, the word came back to us. Again, it was no tax credits. No tax credits, no deal. Devastated, my partner pulled the plug on the project, but this time I was all alone, and $250,000 in debt our organization had spent acquiring the buildings and the land directly across the street from the library. We decided to take a breather in 2007 or 2006, and I set about trying to find a new development partner that would help us submit the next year's round of applications. In 2007, they came along, a Madison development group, young, talented, real aggressive, looking for deals in Milwaukee. It was perfect. Sometime in the fall of 2007, Tom Barrett, the then new mayor of the city of Milwaukee, called me on the phone and invited me down to his office. I thought if I walked in and it was just me and him or just me and an aide, it was all over. You see, everybody knew about the Villard Library, but we were working on lots of things. When I walked into the room, I was shocked. Tom was there with 11 city officials, 11 people. He didn't need 11 people to finish me off. He could have done that all by himself. I was starting to think that maybe the pendulum was swinging back in our favor. But you see, I learned a lesson that day. When there's 11 people in a room hanging on every word that you have to say and totally focused on you, you have all the power. You're in charge of the conversation, unless it's an execution. Then you have no power. Mercifully, it wasn't. In February 2008, We submitted another tax credit application to the state, and in April, word came back. We had 1 tax credit. But you see, God was playing a joke on me. Everybody had 1 tax credit because nobody could sell them. We were right at the beginning of the Great Recession of the late 2000s. And the entire real estate industry was girding for global financial collapse. Banks weren't doing deals because they didn't have to. But our new partner, Ted, said to me, look, I think that we can sell these credits, albeit at a really, really reduced price, would leave a really big funding gap. And then in 2008, in November, I got my first break. Barack Obama got elected President of the United States. And after his inauguration, one of the first things that he did was to get the stimulus bill passed through Congress, which he, among a variety of other things, was used in order to close the gap between what tax credits were being sold for in the marketplace and what we really needed in order to get the project done. But we were still short $1.1 million. So Ted and I went to work. We submitted an application to the state, and we received $850,000 in the spring of 2009. The city gave us another $300,000 to be used in the library. Late that summer, the summer of 2009, I sat in a conference room of our lawyers, and I signed what seemed to be 1 million legal documents. The hard part of this project was over. To quote Winston Churchill, it may not have been the beginning of the end, but it was the end of the beginning. In September 2009, the ground was broken on the project and construction work began. I had never seen a crane on Villard Avenue before, and it justified my great love of cranes. A hole was dug in the ground, the foundation was laid, the corn shell of the building was erected, and the library team took over. It became a race between the library team and the housing team to get the project done on time and on budget. Grand families began moving into the apartments above in July of 2011. A grand family is defined as a grandparent who's taking care of a grandchild when the parents are no longer in the family picture. On Saturday morning, October 15, 2011, 1 month short of 8 years after the last of the protests had ended, the final ribbon was cut on the library, which took place after all the old books in the old library were ceremoniously marched across the street from the old building to the new. Speeches were made, congratulations shared, persistence was rewarded. This silhouette is mounted on the east wall of the library as an homage to the protest. Amazing public art is on display in the library after a lengthy competition of young Milwaukee artists. Graceland Wilson in the middle, her kids, and a community that refused to accept the shabby library as good enough for our neighborhood were the real heroes of 2003. Since October of 2011, over 600,000 library patrons have used the building. 47 families with over 75 kids have moved into the upstairs apartments. And importantly, Milwaukee Public Library declared their next 5 libraries would be mixed use. A good example is East Library, just south of campus on North Avenue. There are apartments above and a brand new beautiful library below. The protest of 2003 had culminated in a library that our community could be proud of, and it changed city policy forever. Was 8 years of struggle worth it? I don't know. Probably not the right guy to ask. But in the front hall of the new library, there's a permanent installation with a picture of a 6-year-old little girl. She's my granddaughter. Was it important to her? I know that she spent all of her Saturdays in that library. It was important to her and important to every 6-year-old child who gets her puppets and her inspiration from a neighborhood library. Thank you very much.